Tomorrow, Scottish politicians debate renewal of Britain's weapons of mass destruction programme on the River Clyde. It comes after estimates suggest Trident renewal may cost £167 billion, 42 times the cost of George Osborne's tax credit cuts against Britain's poorest. Meanwhile, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has been panned by the corporate media for being against Trident and saying he would never press the nuclear button. With me is Major General Patrick Cordingley, who commanded the 7th Armoured Brigade, or Desert Rats, in the First Gulf War. General, thanks for coming back on the show. So we've had a derivation based on 2% of GDP going on defence, 6% of the defence budget being spent on Trident, 167 billion apparently on Trident. Does anyone really know how much it's going to cost except US contractors?
I think the answer is probably no, and it's all guesswork. I mean, Greenpeace, who are very accurate normally with their figures, come up with about 100 billion, but that was 2 or 3 years ago. And if we went it alone, and on a greenfield site, I've seen comments that it could cost as much as 200 billion. But this, of course, is over a 30 to 40-year period.
But it's an amazing amount of money. Tony Blair said in his memoirs that Trident had no military use, non-existent military use. Isn't the point that we need to be a member of the nuclear club because it confers special privileges in international diplomacy?
Well, that, of course, is what the politicians, particularly those in power, would tell us, and it gives us clout. I would argue that's totally unnecessary. What we really need to do is use our diplomacy. We're very good at being diplomatic around the world. We're very good, we're trusted, or have been, maybe till recently, in the Middle East and other places where there are problems. And if we could actually enhance what's happening with the Foreign Office, for instance, whose budget has not been increased year on year, give them more money, get into the diplomacy business, that would be a better way to try and keep world peace, or try to help world peace.
Just remind us again why you're opposed to Trident on the basis of value for money.
Well, it's a very difficult problem. But again, the government would tell us that actually it is a deterrent and it has worked. But this is, I would argue, is disingenuous. It's just the same as the Second Gulf War, where the government told us we had to go into Iraq because Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. We all know now that that was not true. We don't need Chilcot to come up with that in the middle of next year. And I would argue exactly the same is the same over the nuclear issue. We're told this is a deterrent. It might have been a deterrent during the Cold War, but that is all past. Everything has changed now, and it is not necessary. The only reason why we need it is because of the Mutual Defense Agreement signed between this country and America in the 1950s, re-signed every 10 years, and what we get from that is huge benefits. But that's never discussed. It's exactly the same as weapons of mass destruction in 2003. It should be thrown open for public debate, but it's kept very quiet.
Throw open the Mutual Defense Agreement,
well,
the top-secret mutual agreement, which we don't actually have the words to.
Yes, I'm not saying that we should study the agreement in great detail, but we should admit there is an agreement, and then the debate would be, how much is that worth to us? What would we lose if we broke that agreement? Would it really matter? Because just at the moment, we're simply following the Americans in their foreign policy in every way. And a lot of that is to do with this wretched deterrent that we have and that agreement that exists between us.
But the Americans are already threatening Britain over the possibility of Brexit when the referendum happens over Britain leaving the European Union. What would America do to us if we started talking in the way you're suggesting?
Well, there is a possibility that you cut all the information off that we get from them, that we share because we are sharing nuclear know-how. But you must remember that they control everything about our nuclear deterrent. We can't fire it without them. A lot of the...
There's been a denial about that.
That is not true. We simply cannot fire it without their say-so. The missile...
There have been high-level Ministry of Defence people saying it's not. David Cameron famously talking about how the first amazing thing when you're elected as Prime Minister, you write those letters, and it's Britain's independent deterrent.
They would have to say that because of what I'm talking about, this open debate. It is simply not true. The control of firing these things would be the American president who'd pass it to sack her, and we could simply not press the button and fire one ourselves. We just can't do it, I promise you.
So why is it that the politicians aren't listening to the military at the moment about this subject? Because there are other officers, it's not just you who say, and former officers who are saying what you're saying.
I mean, I don't think it's a military debate at all. As a weapons system, it's completely useless. We couldn't fire it. It would have no strategic point for us firing it. Why would we want to kill military 20 million people in miles and miles away and destroy part of some country. What would be the point of that? It's absolutely a diplomatic problem. It is at government level, it's a strategic problem that they've got as to whether to fire to kill 200 or 20 million people in a foreign country. From a military point of view, it isn't a weapon system.
Jeremy Corbyn got into a lot of trouble when he said he wouldn't press the button. Is the point that if you would press the button, it would be illegal under international law because you'd be killing masses of civilians?
Well, I can't see any rational person, even in retaliation, pressing a button to kill 20 million people. The problem, of course, in nuclear war is people become irrational, and it might just happen. But if I just go on to that argument about us being told that we need it because it is a deterrent, you've got to say, now, what is it a deterrent against? In the Cold War, when there were two superpowers, they were deterring each other. And actually, we had a lot of peace now. If you are trying to deter some terrorist group, they're not rational, and that having a nuclear weapon yourself isn't going to deter them.
Well, maybe it's about Russia. Presumably, it is Russia.
Well, but the problem about that is that it is no longer a superpower. And all we're doing at the moment is humiliating Russia in the Ukraine and other parts of the world, and we're ridiculing their performance in the Middle East and in Syria. And anybody who's humiliated will strike back. Now, I'm not suggesting Russia is going to strike back with nuclear weapons, but it's certainly going to say, we've got nuclear weapons, don't humiliate us. What we should be doing is carrying out diplomacy with Russia in the Middle East, as is just about to start. But the normal rational person would have said, we should have done this years ago, and involved Assad, and involved the Iranians.
Well, I know you're far above party politics. Do you think Jeremy Corbyn was right, though, to say, look, I'm not going to be pressing any buttons?
I think the strength...
Because he was ridiculed in the British press for it.
No, the strength of his argument is he fully understands the whole business about the weapons system and the mutual defence agreement. He actually gets it, and he knows perfectly well that now he's in a position of some power.
Now, what's your understanding of the scale of defence cuts as we speak? On the one hand, of 167 billion being spent on what you're saying is a useless project.
Well, that money year on year, and it's £3-4 billion a year as the nuclear deterrent, could well be spent on beefing up our conventional forces. And in particular the army now, reduced to 80,000. If we want to have a useful army that can be involved with the United Nations in conflict resolution, not getting involved in these expeditionary warfares we've been involved in over the last few years, we need an army of some size that's actually relatively well equipped. And one of the problems at the moment is trying to fight alongside the Americans all the time. Equipment to match their equipment, because you need it to talk to each other, to fight next door to each other, is very, very expensive. And we need to break that. It's another argument for breaking the Mutual Defence Agreement, so we can have armed forces that are useful for conflict resolution and for the United Nations. Chatham House, influential think tank, saying that we might not have full-time staff for the new pieces of equipment that are coming on stream, an aircraft carrier and I believe some vessels. I think that's true. And if you come to these aircraft carriers, I mean, they were built for naval vanity, if you like, and for Labour politics, and they're enormous, and they will encourage people to get involved in interventions, as we have done in the past, which is precisely what I'm suggesting we should not do. Actually, we should have more surface ships that can go and help in trouble spots around the world, help the United Nations in a way I've suggested. And we won't have enough people to man these vast ships, because everything's going to be around those people. We won't have enough people to do it, and then we won't have enough people in the armed forces, all told, to do what I'm suggesting that we should do in the world. So where are the military top brass in the corridors of power telling Labour before Corbyn, and little in the Tories, little in the Liberal Democrats, of the cases that you're making about military expenditure? Well, I think, given their due, I mean, one is they're told to do these various operations. If you look at someone like General David Richards, who deeply opposed, I think, to Libya, for instance, I may have been doing him a misfavour. But you go back in time, not that many years, and all three forces are fighting for more, just to keep their fundamental capabilities at the highest level possible. That is no longer possible, and I think they will come out. But of course you're getting a strategic defence review, which is not looking at the whole business, because the nuclear bit is not going to be in it. So you are already losing them £3 or £4 billion a year, which they could be fighting for by saying, actually, we really, well, the Navy wouldn't say that, would they, because it's their submarines, but really we don't need this. And I think there are I would reckon they would be split on whether we actually need a thermonuclear bomb, which is what it is, in our inventory.
And just finally, the British government has been successful, it seems, in getting the British detainee Shakarama back out of the American torture camp in Guantanamo. Any dangers for British personnel involved perhaps in extraordinary rendition, kidnapping and so forth during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars?
I would have thought almost certainly yes. We're well aware that we've been involved with MI6 in extraordinary rendition and things like that, which will never come out, but we are, I think subconsciously we think we probably were. Our special forces have been probably operating in places that we wouldn't have thought that they were operating in. So I would have thought if this chap's got information, it will cause a problem, and the government are going to have to be nimble-footed to resolve it.
General Cordingley, thank you.